That's the Antisocial Podcast, episode 214. This week's guest is Matt Bacon. Matt Bacon is a bit of a PR guru from Dropout Media. You may have seen some of his selfie videos on Insta Stories or Twitter called Bacon Bits. He's also got his own podcast called Dumb and Dumbest Podcast, a music industry podcast that he shares with a couple of other esteemed colleagues in the music industry world. And he gets around the traps. He travels all over the world. He was out here in Australia last year. He's based in New York, and he is... I'm pretty sure he's in his early 20s. He is young, but he is schooling so many people about how to get it done in the metal world when it comes to marketing, PR, DIY, life, etc. And just a really switched on guy doing a lot of great things. Does a lot of keynote speeches, and is just all about informing people, getting a lot of content out there, and just upskilling as many musicians as possible. He does great things, and he came on the podcast not too long ago, and we got to talk about his OG story, lots of things I didn't know about him, and how he got started with his Bacon Bits, the podcast, and a lot of DIY talk. Just talking about DIY lifestyle and the pros and cons to it, and just a really great chat. So you can go and check out Matt on the socials. You can search for Matt Bacon 666 on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can go to dropoutmedia.net, and you can also search for the Dumb and Dumbest podcast on all of your preferred podcast players out there. So enough waffling on from me. Please enjoy this great chat with the man himself, Matt Bacon.
Basically, when I was 14 years old, I moved to Paris. I'd already been into metal, living in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And I kind of grew up back and forth between France and the USA. And so I was into metal. I moved to Paris. I don't have any friends because no one at school likes Darkthrone. Right.
A common
so
problem.
I'm like, yeah, exactly. You know, like fucking posers. So I started this blog, Two Guys Metal Reviews, which I still maintain. And I start writing about unsigned bands. Well, first I was writing about like just whatever I was listening to, right? So like my first thing I did was like, I called it like the March Through the History of Metal, where I just kind of, you know, just like as a 14-year-old started out with like proto metal, like MC5 and Uriah Heep, and made my way up to like, that was like 2010. So like Gent. Yep. Was like just hard, you know what I mean? So that was kind of what I did. I was like, okay, like that seems like, you know. And then I made a post in the Ultimate Guitar Forum, saying like, hey, does anyone here like want me to review their band? I have this blog, and like, you know, and that blew up, and I started to get a ton of attention. I'm still friends with people. Like there are people from that thread. My friends in Insane Dealer are my favorite example of this. I became friends with them in probably 2011 on their first demo. And we end up like staying friends. And like up to the point that they played the main stage of Hellfest last year.
Yeah, wow. That's so cool.
You know, so like that's like how some of those relationships are. You know, there's a couple other people from that I still talk to. And so that kind of got me writing about DIY. This eventually turned into becoming friends with a PR company who would later hire me. I also kind of inherited a record label as a 17-year-old, just because I had been like writing about all their bands and stuff, right? Because they were like, oh, like this kid seems cool, whatever. We'll let him write about our music. And so I was writing about all these bands, and then they all kind of like had kids and quit. And I was like, hey, can I like keep doing the label? And they were like, yeah, bro, whatever, we don't care. And you know, like you're 17, we assume you're not going to do anything with it. We have kids, so you know, not something I'm thinking about, right? And so I actually did end up doing something with it, putting out a few releases from like local bands in Paris, and that was really cool. And yeah, and so then I end up moving back to America to go to college, drop out for this PR job, because just college was, no one else cared. Again, that same fundamental problem, no one else cared about Darkthrone.
This common theme.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this is the the leitmotif of my life, is getting to a point where enough people care about Dark Throne. And so, but then like a few months after I moved to Brooklyn, the guy running the PR company gets a divorce and can't pay me anymore because he's got to like get his shit together. However, a bunch of the clients of that PR company are like, wait, actually, like you were giving us a ton of good advice about our social media and stuff. Because what I'd been doing for years was giving bands advice from social media because I was reviewing so many. I saw more bands than anyone else, right? Like if I was writing a review a day, it meant that I was checking out a different band's Facebook every day. And you do that. Yeah. And you do that for a few years and you start to understand like what is and what is not sustainable. You know what I mean? And so a couple of these bands are like, hey, we'll keep paying you. And one of the labels that worked with them also wanted to keep paying me. And so then I was, 19 years old, living in Brooklyn, making $1,300 a month and paying $1,000 a month in rent. And I made it work. And that was kind of the inception. I was managing a band called Tengar Cavalry at the time who kind of got to a pretty high level while I was managing them. And that was something else that kind of opened a lot of doors. In the meantime, just by virtue in Paris of having been like the only kid who spoke English and French and had like discipline, I had been like doing a lot of translation stuff for Hellfest. So that led to a lot of opportunities, but it just kind of grew out of that. That's sort of the origin story.
Well, I was going to ask, having sort of that split childhood, being based in France for a few years, whether that would have been an advantage to you. But I mean, just the translation alone for such an influential festival or company organization being Hellfest, that alone's worth its weight in gold. But
it's insane. Like every year they'll be like, are you like still like going to do this for free? And I'm like, motherfucker, like half the money I've ever made comes from this goddamn festival. Like, yeah.
It must be, yeah. I mean, even just to have that sort of wider perspective of, what the scene or whatever it was that you could grasp onto in France at the time versus, being an American kid as well, seeing sort of, I guess, where the parallels are, where the commonalities are, but also the differences, and being able to blend that all together would have been a big help to you, just sort of building. And it probably wasn't even, I'm assuming it wasn't a conscious thing as you're, starting off with doing reviews and things like that and thinking, well, this is definitely my domain. This is where I want to go. But no doubt it would have helped you along the way.
Yeah. I mean, and that's still kind of my thing, right? Is like, I'm still like the guy who can like play nice with the Europeans, but who also has an American mindset. And I think that a lot of Europeans really value that because I can help, I can kind of be like a cultural bridge, like that's always what I kind of viewed my role as, is like, I always knew that I could be the guy who could like be the American friend or conversely, the French friend. So it just kind of happened, but you're right. It just kind of happened that way. I think when I moved to America, there was a lot of culture shock and I had a hard time with it, especially because like in France clubs are 18 plus, but it's like, like you're good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
it's a bit laxed.
Yeah. So like, like the first time I went into an 18 and over club, I think I was like 15 or 16. And I found out like after leaving, I was probably 15.
And no offense or anything, but I did see a couple of photos of you from several years ago, and you do have, I mean, getting rid of the facial hair, you've got a baby face.
Yeah.
So, it's not like you're going to be like, oh, you look older than what you are.
I was like, it's not like I was like the most like, I wasn't one of those 16-year-olds with a full beard.
Yeah.
Like everyone knew, which is fine. But like when I moved to America, it was like, oh wait, I can't go to all these bars I've been that look like the bars I've been going to for 5 years or 4 years. You know what I mean? Like,
I think
and it was
that's a big difference. I've noticed that as well. I mean, just traveling around the world, and Europe's probably, I mean, that's probably the best example out there where I just think, I don't think there's enough care about the pressures of alcohol or temptation and things like that. I think they sort of give a bit more responsibility back into the individual rather than trying to parent everybody. And whereas I think Australia's similar to the United States, where while we're still 18, we're not 21, but we've still got a lot of that sort of parenting attitude with everybody around us. So there's a lot of
fucking Mike Beard and the lockout laws.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I think that's part of what makes it. Yeah, and I think, you know, in Australia you have coward punchers. In America we just have dumb college kids, and that doesn't happen as much in Europe because, you know, Europeans are busy getting fucked up when they're 15, not when they're 18 or 19.
That's it. Get it,
you know, so like
get it out of their system pretty quickly and become just sort of social moderate drinkers, if anything.
Yeah. Whereas I feel like, you know, if you don't have that freedom to burn it out, you know, and that was something I struggled with for a long time, you know, and it's hard, you know, so no judgment. All this to say, yeah. And that's one of the kind of interesting things though, is like, I didn't really realize until a few years in, like how much of a head start I had over every American kid in metal. Cause I had seen, like, not just because I had the blog, but because I had seen all these bands well before any other kid my age had seen them. You know, some because they were Europe only. Like I remember moving to America and no one believed that I had seen Emperor. You know what I mean? And I was like, well, actually I saw them side stage.
Just to rub it in.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, absolutely. Fuck those people. But, you know, so like there was that aspect, but it was also just like, you know, in America, you don't have a lot of 18-year-olds who've been to, you know, 500 bar shows. It happens, you know, my friend Dorian Domi was one. He's one of my really good friends for that reason. But like, it's not as easy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Did you, what were some of the other things that you noticed sort of coming back to the States as far as the culture shock's sort of concerned?
I think, so public transit really fucked with me for a while.
Yeah.
Because outside of New York City, it's basically non-existent in America. And there's like a couple good lines in LA, you know, don't get me wrong. But that, like when I moved to Philadelphia, I kind of assumed I could like go to shows and do things and it's without a car. And it's like, no, that's, you know, like you're taking a taxi home, and the few times you do take a train, you're like literally sat next to a dude with half a fucking face and you're just like, you know, hearing gunshots in the distance and you're just like, oh, okay. You know, I also think the, you know, the technical capabilities of the musicians are very different. I feel like American underground music comes from hardcore, you know, whereas European underground, you know, and all American underground music comes from hardcore. Even like the Avett Brothers, who are a huge singer-songwriter folk thing, were a hardcore band first.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like hardcore is where, you know, 90% of artists and probably 50% of pop artists have their origins here. In Europe, that is not the case. In Europe, you have people from a variety of backgrounds, you know, metal being one, but also they're, you know, like you don't have, in America, you don't have a lot of metal bands where like the guitar player went to like a jazz conservatory. Whereas in Europe, it's like a cool thing, but it's not, you know, but no one's like, oh, wow, you went to a jazz conservatory. You know what I mean? Like,
that's right. If anyone goes there, they're going there actually for their own self-development rather than to try and, I guess, boost their ego within their social circles, because it doesn't carry the same weight. It's just a case of, It's just
Yeah.
it's an extra badge that I sort of wear that shows my skill set, but it's not really sort of pushing me up in the social circles.
Exactly. That's sort of the thing, right? Is like, it's just, and that's just because of different approaches to music education and different viewpoints on life, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
Which is all well and good, and it means that there are very different ideas of what people are into and what people are engaging with. I think, I moved to America. One of the first shows I saw was Code Orange kids, Full of Hell, and Noisem in like a storage unit. And, now Code Orange is a band who have been nominated for Grammys now.
Yeah. That's wild.
And Full of Hell had like just done a record with Merzbow, and it was just like this very weird. And then and I was driven there by Zach from Outer Heaven.
Wow, there you go.
Right,
a little bit surreal.
Yeah. Well, but at the time he was Zach from Castle Freak, my like kind of weird friend being nice to me because I had just moved here from France, and I was another kid who liked the same type of music as him. He's a few years older than me. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, it was, and then like I went, and the person I hung out with at that show was my friend Michael, who's now in Waking the Cadaver. Yeah, like, but like, that's just what it was. Like, it's not like, this is some, and what strikes me about US music is that you're a lot more likely to meet people who I feel like in American hardcore, I feel like it's a lot easier, or there's a much more clear path to the top than in Europe. In Europe, the scene is very crowded, and the community is very, and it's just a different level of intensity. Like in America, if you're like a dude who goes to a lot of shows at the hip club, right? You're just kind of by default, you're friends with at least one person in like a popular band, right? Just because like that's what it is. Like, it's easier to meet these people, and there's less of a screen, and like even dumb shit, useless stoner guys have a buddy in Pelican or something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Just because that's how it is. And people are a lot more accessible here. Whereas in Europe, because metal is a much bigger thing, these people are again, it's a lot harder to penetrate the market, which is interesting to say the least. And it's a lot harder to penetrate the market, and it's just generally speaking, a very different ball game. In America, it's not crazy to be like, oh, you're going to break, and because of this, that, and the other. And
I guess the entry points.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess the entry points with with music in different markets, it's so varied because in Europe,
yeah,
one thing that I noticed like years and years ago, like the first couple of times I went to Europe, just because metal's so big over there and it's so varied, and there's so many niche subgenre markets within like one country, let alone the whole sort of European sort of area. There's, and I'm not going to word this right, so any Euro mates listening are probably going to cringe, but there's almost like this I don't give a fuck sort of care factor when it comes to music in certain respects, where you can have a well-known legacy band that comes through a German city, and they get 150 payers to a show, and then you turn around and ask someone and go, well, where is everybody? And they're like, well, these guys will be back in a few months, and tomorrow night we've got, this massive band, and then Wednesday night we've got this band, and Thursday night we've got this band, and there's so much abundance of music where.
But here's the thing that's funny is that 150 people in America is a great fucking show.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Same in Australia. It's like, if you can pull that to a show, then you're laughing. You're already ahead of the majority of the pack when it comes to that. But I always notice with Europe, it was sort of like, it's okay. Like if we miss this show, we'll see them next time. They'll be back, and we've got just so much on our plate as far as options are concerned. Whether it be in the midst of the summer season with a million different festivals, or outside of the summer season where you've just got a million different tours and package tours that are coming through, where you're not starved for options, which is fantastic in a lot of ways because it opens up so many opportunities for artists to try and get a foot in the door. But as you said before, it's very crowded as well, which makes the competition fierce.
Yeah, and it's just a tricky, weird. It's a tricky, weird thing because and again, like in America, I think it just felt. I mean, it felt stressful for different reasons, but again, like you can, like it's just as simple as like booking a DIY tour. Like any American band can do that relatively easily. Dylan from Full of Hell once told me, I can book a US tour in about an hour on my phone. And I thought that was the craziest thing ever when I was 19. And then I got to a point where I could do that, but I don't think that's possible in Europe because promoters are much smarter because they actually have choice, and whereas in America, they'll book a show where they know 20 people are going to show up. In Europe, that would never happen. You know what I mean? If 20 people showed up, everyone would be mad at you and that's for a variety of reasons, usually pertaining to how payment structured and employee protection and whatever. But like, that's the thing is that, you don't have this culture of get in the van in Europe the way you do in America, where you can book, shitty little DIY hardcore tours when you're 17, 18 and learn some shit. You know what I mean?
Well,
like it's a struggle.
I think it's been a big thing that's hurt a lot of metal bands in Australia because there's this perception with Australia where, all of our cities are so spread apart. It's so hard to get between cities. Everyone's got to fly. But there's a lot of, rural sort of country towns in between where you could easily smash out a tour on the road in a van. And yeah, look, you might get that one show during the week where you get, 10 payers or something like that. But, the really popular bands in Australia that have done really, really well have been these sort of, a lot of hardcore bands, punk bands that have got relative sort of mainstream success within sort of those alternative circles. Whereas I think a lot more of the sort of, and I won't use the genre traditional metal, but sort of more traditional metal sort of holistically.
Conventional.
Yeah, conventional. Yeah, better word. And, I think haven't been willing to sort of really get down into the grittiness of it and just get out there and smash out a couple of years of doing that, to really sort of get out there and get in front of as many people as possible. I think most of us, and we're guilty of that more so these days, where if we're going to do a tour, we'll hit the main cities and that's it. And that usually equates to a 5 or 6 day date tour, and that's about it. Whereas all these larger towns in between just completely miss out, which means that that's a large part of your potential audience that you're missing out of. And that was one thing that I've always loved about North America is that you've already got a million different major cities in the country, but also sort of large towns, and there's just a lot of opportunity there, and it does mean slogging it out. It does mean months and months on the road, and probably a lot of tears more so than anything else. But the opportunities are definitely there, especially in that DIY space.
Absolutely. And it's also because gas is so cheap in America.
Yeah, true.
I kind of got a little bit of a lecture about that from someone important recently. But like, in America, there's this concept of doing A market tours where you're hitting your like, your Philly, your Atlanta, your New York City, Baltimore, like your big cities. Then you do the B market tour where you're like, okay, now we're going to do, just like San Jose, San Luis Obispo, Bellingham, or whatever. And then you can do a C market tour where you do even smaller cities. You know what I mean? And that's like a completely acceptable option in America. Right? Like everyone's like, yeah, like this is how it is you do, you do your big boy tour, then you do a smaller markets, then you do even smaller, and that works. And that doesn't work other places because the gas is more expensive.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's been a challenge here in Australia. But I think, one thing I learned really early in the piece was about offsetting and understanding that there's, in certain pockets or certain runs of shows where your guarantees, your deals, or the projected numbers from a show are not going to cover costs, but you've got enough of, going back to just your terminology before, sort of A market cities or tour runs, then you can sort of offset, knowing that those larger shows are going to be offsetting the ones that might seem a little bit more risky because it's a new market for you or it's a smaller market, but it's still integral to sort of build up that sort of core audience. So it sometimes involves a lot more sort of creative planning, and it's not always as straightforward as I think what many of us would like it to be, but it's certainly not impossible.
Well, and it's also like, for me, it's always like, what would you rather do? Would you rather have a day you make no money or a day you go, 50 miles out of your way and make some money?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely a sense of having to offset, especially like in America when you're going across the middle of the country and there's just nothing, kind of like how you guys have, what do you call the drive from Adelaide to Perth?
Oh,
the Nullarbor.
Nullarbor, yeah, fuck that.
Although that's maybe like a more extreme version.
Yeah.
But still.
Well, that's it. I mean, you've got to factor in what that fuel cost is going to be, and whatever provisions you're going to need to keep everyone mildly sane during that stretch of time, and that costs money. And then working out what's on the other end of that trip, that particular drive or stretch, and making sure that there's something on the other end that's going to balance it all out and make it viable. And it's just a lot of forward thinking and putting enough safety nets in there just for the worst case scenarios. It's a bit of worst case scenario setting, and just making sure that you're protected as much as possible. I mean, there's always so many unknowns, especially with touring and DIY stuff. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it over the years where, bands have just rocked up to places and just gone, where's the stage, or where's the gear, or where's the power, or something absolutely shocking. But,
the bar doesn't know there's a show there that night.
Oh, yeah.
The bar cancels the show 48 hours in advance. When you're already like there, you know what I mean? Like, and you're just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
What's more awkward is when you get booked in the 500-person room and 8 people show up.
Ooh.
4 of whom showed up because they're friends with the tour manager.
Yeah.
That happened to a band I was TMing one time, and that was rough.
Oh.
Because it was like my friends, the literally 4 or 5 paying people in a 500-person room, and I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's not good. I've always preferred to play a very small place with not a lot of people than a large, empty, echoey, really awkward room, because it's just, I think it's one of those things where it's an attack on the ego no matter what you do, but I'd much rather be in a small, cozy place than this big place thinking I'm bigger than what I am.
Well, it's not even that. Well, because I think like in this particular case, I think it was probably just like this was the only venue that was open that night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like these things happen, I get it, like, But it's not just an attack on the ego, although that's fair. Like, it's very Spinal Tap, that like the biggest venue of the tour, you know, where they're like lowering our stage banner from the ceiling on a mechanical arm,
Yeah.
you know. But like, it's not only that, but it's also like, it's not a good look for your fans, you know, because like I've been at shows where I was one of 8 people in the big room, and I'm just like, you know, like I just feel weird, you know, and everyone feels weird, like.
And especially if especially if you've got like a front man who's like just yelling at the 5 people to go, get up the front or I can't hear you. And it's just like, oh, come on, man. Like I'm trying to keep it together for you by just being here, by being present, let alone.
Yeah. Like I could just walk out because this is awkward. Yeah.
Oh, I see
like,
that. Oh, I see that so often. It's just, it makes you're pushing people away.
John Oliver has this bit about how when he was a young struggling comic, he cleared a room, and the last lady who was there, he's just trying to continue and hold it together, right? And the last lady who's there picks up her bag, and mid-set, you know, it's him, the sound man, and her, and he asks her, "Are you about to leave?" And she says, "Yes." And he's like, what do you do in that situation? Like, you can't be like, no, you're not allowed to leave.
And I'm just going to talk to the sound guy now, and that's it. Like, I'll just pretend there's an audience here.
Because it's not even like, you know, it's not even like you're with your band, and at least you can, like, view it as a rehearsal. Although that's also the worst, is when you're at a show that's very empty, and then one of the bands decides to declare it a open rehearsal and says, "Thank you for coming to our open rehearsal." That's always just like, oh god.
Yeah, there's a fine line, because you've got to show some professionalism where you know, it's the old saying where it's like you don't know who those people are in the room, even if there's just a couple of people.
Yeah.
And so you should be,
and you don't want to bitch about it.
And oh yeah, definitely. But at the same time, you don't want to be over the top thinking that you're playing in Wembley Arena or something like that, where, you know, you're just kidding yourself. So there's this balance where you've got to keep it together and do what you do, but still understand that you probably are in a bit of a unique setting with a few tumbleweeds flying around the room. So you've just got to find a way to find that sort of comfortable balance where everybody's feeling relatively okay. But it's oh man, I mean, I'm getting cold sweats just thinking about it. I've certainly been.
Oh no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But then every once in a while you find, like, if you're a band who has like a good sense of humor about it and are like funny,
yeah,
then like that can make. I was like, while we were talking about this, I was thinking about a band, and I can't even remember their name. It was like their second to last show or something. Like, they never went anywhere. But I was thinking about how they did this show, and there was like 10 people, but they were like inviting people on stage to headbang and like buying like. They were like running up a tab at the bar from the stage, buying the people in the crowd Jack Daniels. Like, look, we'll pay for it. Everybody gets Jack Daniels. Like, and it was like really fun and really like they like, because they were self-aware about the fact that like there's no one here and this is lame. You know what I mean?
I guess they were embracing it instead of like making it eat away at them. Yeah.
And, you know, and the worst is when this happens on tour. It's like you always tell smaller bands going on tour to play second to last, you know, because you don't want all the because like what will happen a lot of the time is the locals will see their friend's band and then they'll just leave.
Yep. Oh, yep. Been there. Yeah.
You know, and that's always the worst. Or like, what I lost a client this way. This is brutal. This was a really big client of mine, actually. And the promoter told me there would be a band after. And the promoter and I had like had a good show with this band before, so I was like, okay, I trust him. There was no band after. And I just remember being sat next to this guy's wife, and she was like, there's no one here. And I was like, thanks, lady.
Oh, man.
And that's what DIY is, that's what DIY is.
Well, yeah, absolutely, definitely. And I think one thing that's, I guess, sort of where the point that you're making is that DIY doesn't have like entry level credentials that you need in order to sort of
absolutely
open the door to get started. Like anybody,
which is the beauty of it.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's an open market and it allows people to give it a shot and see what they can make of it. But at the same time, you can deal with all sorts of different people and you just do not know, you just don't know what it's going to be. 100%. And, especially somebody who's probably not, or probably somebody that's lacking in a bit of professionalism or hasn't had exposure to sort of working with people that are probably a little bit higher up the ladder, so to speak. They could just be having a bad day, and instead of keeping it together and maintaining their own or understanding what reputation is, just decide fuck it and throw the towel in and decide to half-ass everything. And then you've just got to deal with it. You've got to manage it. You've got to manage that person. You've got to manage whatever they've put together, and just try to salvage whatever you can in the hope of having sort of a half okay show at the end of it. And
this happens all the time. I think people think this will stop happening at some point. But I literally was hanging out with someone recently, and he was telling me his band was flown out to a show on the and a bunch of money was spent on them, and they get there and the venue has never had a show before, and the sound guy didn't know what he was doing, so he had to set up the PA himself. Which is fine. You deal with it, but that's what it is, right? Is even if you get to the point where you're being flown out somewhere, sometimes then you still have to, it's still not a given, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think especially for musicians, one thing that I sort of noticed early in the piece was, I can't remember who said it, but there's an old saying where it's if you want to get something done, you do it yourself. And so I sort of it was almost starting to parent everybody, and not in an overly sort of controlling way, but just having to check in with everybody and double check information or sort of over service a situation.
Oh, totally.
Just to cover yourself as much as possible, because there's so many times where you took a step back and sort of put the hat on of, well, I'm the musician, I'm the performer, or I'm the headliner tonight, so that's my role to play. And then you just look around and realize that nobody's done anything and you can't even do what your role's meant to be. So suddenly it's okay, well, what do I need to do to really sort of protect myself to ensure that I can do what I'm meant to be doing, but also, making sure that the entire night or whatever's going on runs relatively smoothly. So I mean, I always look at it from a sort of a glass half full perspective, because, that's been my development. I'm sure it's been the same for you over the years. It's the adversity helps.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, sometimes, even when you're dealing with bigger people, now some people who are bigger don't get anything done just because they're incompetent or because they were in a cool band, so they got the job that they really shouldn't have had, which happens all the time.
Yeah.
But also it's just because, sometimes they're just real fucking busy. Do you know fucking how much I have going on in a given day? Stuff slips through the cracks, And now it's on me in terms of how I deal with it when stuff slips through the cracks. To figure out what my next steps are and how to minimize stuff that slips through the cracks. But that happens too. It's not just incompetent people all the way down, although that's a big part of it. It's also, this is hard and you're going to suffer.
Well, I think it's a bit of that sort of freelance sort of lifestyle where we're all sort of self-reliant to a degree of our own day-to-day, getting stuff done and also being prepared for the unexpected, which is kind of
100%
kind of attacks each other, those terms. But anything can happen on any single day, and it's almost a case of, you kind of almost want your own manager just to manage yourself, to manage your day-to-day, because it's just, there's so much going on all the time. And in music, it's one of those unique industries where it's just a bit of everybody is in the mix doing all sorts of different things, but in the majority of the cases everybody's sort of just trying to manage themselves and their own schedule and what's coming in and going out. So it's highly unpredictable at times.
Yeah, but that's also what I kind of love about it, right? I love that on a given day I can like sit down with like some pretty high level businessmen and talk about like stuff that's going to make 6 or 7 figures, you know, and then I can turn around and like go in and talk to some punks about something and have that piece too, you know, because that's also fun for me, you know, like I like both sides. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like I like that I have a friend named Scabies. I also like that I get to put together, you know, 50-page contracts, you know, and I like that I can text Scabies about a show at the Pariah while I'm putting together a 50-page contract that's going to open up some Norwegian label in North America.
I love it. But
you know what I mean?
And it also, I'm assuming it also means that to be able to have those two sort of polarizing, you know, types of people that you're interacting with, you're still able to be you, no matter who you're speaking to. Obviously, in certain cases, you adjust slightly, but more or less, you know, it's not like your traditional sort of, you know, job that somebody might have, a 9-to-5 job where, you know, the personality that you bring into the office space versus, you know, your friends outside of work is just polar opposites. So it's just like there's nothing that can sort of cross over. Whereas I guess, you know, working in, especially what you do, I mean, it's still Matt no matter what, I assume.
I mean, yes and no. This is actually an interesting point. I get a lot of criticism about this from my friends. Well, not criticism, but like feedback, you know, because like I think the difference when music is like, you know, like if you have a normal day job, like you're not bringing your friends to work events usually. You know what I mean? Whereas like all of my friends want to go to all of my work events.
That's a challenge in itself.
Yeah. You know, and you have to learn how to navigate that, and that took me a while to learn. But you understand what I'm trying to say with that. All of my friends, all of my work events, yeah. And so you have to learn to balance that. You know what I mean? You have to, and I think that there is, and I've been told quite clearly that there is a work Matt who comes out.
Yeah, right, cool.
You know, but I try to like, I don't know, like I want to still be honest with people. I don't want to like be blowing smoke up anyone's ass, you know, but if there is a work Matt that comes out, that's also not something I can deny. Like I definitely sense in myself a different side of me that kind of gets brought to the fore at those times.
I guess it's sort of like, you know, you've got a public persona that you've been building your own branding, and so that doesn't sway too much from what I've seen. Now, how you interact with people on a day-to-day basis, depending on what the purpose of those interactions are, might change. But you know, you're not hiding your public persona for one particular party or anything like that. It's still you. It's you holistically of what your branding is, and that's kind of cool. Whereas I think a bit of a roundabout way of me trying to explain it, but I guess sort of those traditional jobs, sometimes, you know, it's sort of like those old stereotypes, which don't exist as much anymore, but, you know, it's like, oh, I better cover up the sleeve tats with a long sleeve shirt, you know, or I'll make sure that nobody knows that I play in a band, or, you know, just making sure that whatever I'm doing outside of work, that my boss doesn't know about that, because, you know, it's probably not in line with what the company's expectations are, or things like that. So whereas, you know, being a bit of a freelancer or being self-employed and creating your own branding, you've got more control over that. So you can still flex and show different sides of yourself, but ultimately you're you, like in a whole sense.
I mean, yes and no. Like I think that more than people realize, especially at some of the higher tiers, like these are like straight businessmen. They're just straight businessmen who like hardcore, you know, and I kind of try to like balance that with, you know, like I might be that guy, but I also have, you know, like when I'm meeting with like some of my more conventional partners, for lack of a better term, I'll, you know, like I have the long hair and the beard, but I also wear like nice V-necks.
Yep.
Which are like a pretty effective way to kind of just be like, look, okay, like I'm the fun rock and roll guy, but also put together, but it's tricky. I don't disagree.
At what point did you sort of think about branding a bit more for yourself? Because, talking earlier about sort of, getting out there and just really enjoying metal and music and reviewing different bands and sort of building up this thing yourself just because out of own self-interest, but getting to that point where you're thinking, well, you're starting to see people coming to you for your own expertise. Was there a point where you sort of thought, I need to do something more to get my own name out there instead of just organically sort of feeding off, this word of mouth reputation that you'd built yourself? Was there a sort of turning point at all, or is that sort of still are you still going through this at the moment?
That's a good question. I think it's tricky. I think early on, I was writing band advice articles, like even from the age of 18, right? I was like, I also understood that the reason I was able to work with Hellfest when I was a teenager, and the reason I was able to work with this, that, and the other was that I had this whole legacy of writing, and I was also aware that, I'm not really super confident in my writing. I think I may be a 6.5, 7 out of 10 writer, but I think I'm a really good interviewer. And I was aware that was also part of my shtick, was that like, that's the French guy who's like really good at interviewing bands. But it really wasn't until Bacon's Bits happened that, which is my daily Instagram video series, like that's educational content for bands, for those not in the loop. It wasn't until that happened that it really like came together. You know what I mean? And that I was like, oh, okay, now we're going to really build brand. Now we're really going to double down, because I think it used to be like, oh, like the party guy and yada, yada, yada. But I wasn't, he's involved in stoner rock. But I think that, and that built up a reputation, but I don't think it necessarily built brand.
So
you know what I mean?
So the Bacon Bits thing that you've been doing, that wasn't sort of a strategic thing to begin with as far as, well, this is going to be building that brand. It was sort of off the back of doing that you sort of went, oh, wow, okay, now I need to look at this a bit more carefully.
I was already having traction with my reviews, with my articles. And then it was actually Curtis Dewar who recommended I do the videos. And he kind of opened my eyes and made me go like, oh, okay, this is actually going to be really effective. And I think then the visual brand started to evolve a lot more rather than just metal looking guy, into like, metal looking guy who wears V-necks into like something like very clearly defined with the cigar and the over the top personality and the 14-hour workday. And, like that's when it started to, and it's always evolving, but it's like, that's when it started to coalesce. Cause like, and a lot of that was like, this is the guy I had been for a while, it's just that now it's able to like really kind of shine and be its thing. Did
you struggle with those first few videos? Just like just seeing yourself and sort of wondering, oh geez, is this worth putting out?
Well, it wasn't even that, because like, again, like I was very self-aware about the fact that I wasn't a great writer, but I was still putting out a lot of writing stuff, but it was also like right after I had I had stopped drinking, and and now I drink very, very minimally, but it was like right after that and a couple other like really hard things that had happened in my life, and like you can kind of tell in those early ones that I'm like going through some shit and trying to get my shit together. You know what I mean? Like you can tell that it's like this kind of awkward kid who's just like, okay, like this is kind of my last, my shot. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And did you, what sort of reaction did you get from those first few videos? It was
like pretty immediately positive. Cause again, there was a lot of people who knew who I was. You know what I mean? And that really helped, so I already had a built-in audience.
Yeah, that helps.
And then like within, I started in early April, right, by early May, I'm in London for Desert Fest London. And I'm peeing, and someone grabs me and says, "Hey, you're that Matt Bacon guy with those videos on the internet." And I was like, yeah. And that was kind of when I knew, like, that was really weird, obviously. But that was when I knew, like, okay, I can be that guy.
You're onto something. I mean, I think that's one thing for myself personally, I've always struggled with, because, you know, if you're watching any of these people online, sort of, you know, online marketing gurus or, you know, sort of branding experts, you know, it's all about, well, it's about a bunch of different things. But one of the things is around the content that you put out there and making sure it's valuable content and being varied in what you do and keeping things interesting. And you don't have to lean into video, but, you know, a lot of people talk really favorably about video, and especially depending on how users digest information as well. And I've always gone, oh man, video is exciting, but then, you know, if I do that flip thing on like Insta stories or just on my phone and I see my face, I just go, oh man, no, I can't do this. I can't take myself seriously. So I'm really sort of
it's hard.
Yeah. But I'm really impressed by people that have made that decision to give it a shot, because it's not a natural thing, I think, for a lot of people. And
I agree.
Yeah, but it can be really effective.
I think you just need to you just need to embrace it, and you need to just keep forcing yourself to do it. You know, because, like, at the end of the day, like, I've had, and this has been kind of encouraging, you know, when it's scary, is I've had, like, some really known people, musicians or otherwise, be like, wow, I could never do that. And I'm like, you literally sing death metal in front of 1,000 people every night. Like, what do you mean you couldn't do my fucking dumb minute-long video thing? And, you know, so, like, I get it. I hear this from people. You know, so you know, but, like, the thing is, people think it's cool when you stick your neck out, you know? And, like, I make a point of sticking my neck out for things. You know, even, and you've got to do that. Like, right now, I'm going to MC at this festival in Taos, in front of, like, 1,500 people. And that's, like, the scariest thing in the world to me. Like, because I've spoken in front of, like, 200 or 300, and that's hard, but not too bad. But it's not like, but that was, like, lectures. It's not like hype manning 1,500 people. You know what I mean? But I said yes because this is something, you know, it's important to challenge yourself.
Yeah, you gotta break the ice.
Exactly.
Just dive in there and not think about it too much. And yeah, I mean, and it's a good point, because I sort of think about all the things that I do now just on a day-to-day basis, and then I sort of rewind back 15, 20 years ago, and my, you know, 20-year younger self would be freaking out at what I do now. And so it's one of those things where you just got to keep reminding yourself of, you know, how you got to the point that you are now, and, you know, just repeat that formula again as far as just diving in and just, you know, taking action.
100%. It's definitely, like, it's definitely super tricky, man. You know, it's definitely, and it's a mental struggle and an emotional struggle, and, you know, but you can't, like, what I find is anytime I, like, really start to think about it, that's when I freak out. But if I just kind of am like, oh, this is what I do, is I write articles and I record podcasts and I do whatever, like, then I'm a lot more, you know, then it's, like, a lot less scary. Because I think once you, like, get in your head about it, like, it'll fuck you up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, been there, done that. What's on your plate at the moment? What's because I saw on Twitter the other day, I think you wrote something like you got 6 Euro trips planned, another trip back down to Australia as well. Must be a decent year ahead.
I mean, decent, incredibly terrifying. You know, the Australian trip I can't say too much about, but yeah, you know, like just a million festivals I got to go to, and it'll be cool. But that's what it is. You know, that's what I think, as far as I can tell, for the next 20 years, every April through October, you know, go to Europe every 3 weeks. You know, plus all the US stuff you got to do.
Well, I can certainly think of worse things to do, that's for sure. I mean, putting the internet aside, just, you know, from all your traveling and networking, like just being able to go to so many places and just be able to drop in and be able to build up rapport with, you know, friends that you've built relationships with over the years.
Absolutely. And that's like the fun of it. And just like, again, being aware of like I really love Australia because of all the weird, dumb cultural stuff.
We've got a lot of that.
Like the coward punchers, like fucking Mike Beard. Like, I just get so much, like the mullets. I fucking love the mullets. You know, like that's what makes it valuable to me, is like having those jokes, being aware, you know?
Cool, man. Well,
what's the thing where you like drink the wine from a bag off the clothesline or something?
We call it goon, and then we got the goon bag, and then on the clothesline we call it goon of fortune. So
yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well,
like it's my great ambition to do a shoey.
Oh, right.
Next year. I've never done that. I'm very excited.
I think we need to update our tourism campaigns to attract people here, and put shoey into the television advertising and online advertising. It's like, visit Australia, you can see a kangaroo and see a koala and do a shoey.
I mean, and for those without context, can you explain what a shoey? Should I explain what a shoey is?
Yeah,
can I explain what I think a shoey is?
Yeah, definitely.
I think a shoey is when you take your shoe off and pour a beer into it directly, and then just drink it out of the shoe. Is that correct?
That's pretty much it. Yeah. So it's
yum.
Yeah, that's definitely the first word I think of when I think of a shoey. Oh man, it's Look, you know what? It'd be a really good sort of video for yourself to consider down the track, is when you're doing your bacon bits, instead of a cigar, you could do a shoey one. Just a quick sort of 1 minute bite-sized piece of information for a fellow friend out in the music industry while necking a shoey, and who knows, that could be a game changer for you.
Maybe that's a secret to the next step of Bacon Spits, is neck a shoey.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, I appreciate that advice.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm full of it.
Well, I'll see you around. I'll see you around another Goon of Fortune sometime soon.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely, man. So wrapping up, where's the best places for people to stalk you, find out what you're doing, and following a bit of your advice?
Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at MattBacon666.
Perfect. Excellent.
Yeah, and then on social media as Dropout Media, or just add me as a friend, Matt Bacon. I am here to answer your questions.
Hey, go and reach out to Matt on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter by searching Matt Bacon666. If you're in a band and you're curious about the PR side of things, go to dropoutmedia.net. There's heaps of free online content on there, so go and check that out. And if you want to spend a bit of coin, which is always a good idea if you want to get quality service, hit Matt up, and he's got paid services on there as well. And if he can't help you, no doubt he'll steer you in the right direction. Also, check out their podcast called Dumb and Dumbest Podcast. So it's him, as well as Curtis Dewar from Dewar PR, as well as Keefe from Ghost Cult Magazine as well. That's a great podcast. I've been on there once. Hopefully get on there again. Love talking music industry talk, and there's lots of great ideas. I've been able to get heaps of ideas from those guys on the podcast. So, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know how regularly they put out episodes, but it's at least a couple of times a week. So make sure you go and check that out if you're in a band and just curious about DIY stuff, ideas. As always, you can learn about me by going to andydowling.net. Our band Lord's on there. The podcast I'm involved with, whether it be here, being Andy Social, Nod to the Old School or my Self-Startup podcast as well. All my social media handles are there. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to paypal.me/AndyDowlingOfficial. As always, reach out to Matt and any of the guests that have been on the podcast. Let them know what you thought. Send them a bit of Andy social love. It goes a hell of a long way to support me, the podcast, and of course, these lovely guests who've been on. Until next week, folks, another Crazy Talk episode coming early next week. And of course, another guest episode coming this time next week, Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Sydney time. And until then, folks, take care. Ta-ta.